Hey everyone, today we're going to take a look at the new Marvel Legends Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 Groot Deluxe action figure. This comes on loan to me from my friend Raymond because I don't really collect Marvel Cinematic Universe characters, so shout out to him. As usual, also please like, share, comment, subscribe, or even hit the super thanks button. I do appreciate all engagement on my channel. Before we unbox this figure, let's have a look at the box. Up front we have the render of Groot, the little tiny rocket raccoon accessory. There's the dreamy picture of Groot in the background. Guardians of the Galaxy logo up front. On the top of the box we have the Guardians logo, and down to the bottom some product information with a plastic-free packaging notice. On the side of the box it looks like artwork of Groot going into battle. On the back of the box we have Groot in a running pose. He comes with the wings and the interchangeable hands accessories. They also show you his height over here, and there's more product information at the bottom. Finally, onto that last side of the box, we have Groot in a vanilla pose. So let's go ahead and get this Groot open. With the plastic-free packaging, the figure is encased on a cardboard insert. Just getting the figure out from his cardboard insert. On the sides we have the accessories stored, and in the front and the main compartment we have wax paper baggies for his wings and the figure. The bag isn't sealed, it's open down the side. So here we have the figure out of the bag. In the flat baggie we have his wings. And finally, in the smallest baggie we have the rest of his accessories, which are his two interchangeable hands and the mini rocket figure. His wings are sculpted in a milk chocolate kind of brown plastic. It does slot together for the middle pack over here. There's decent sculpting work, so you can believably see how these wings are constructed from wooden grain and fiber. I like how it also looks quite randomly sculpted and growing out, much like the way that Groot regenerates his parts. So while the sculpting looks random in nature and makes it have that organic feel, I cannot say the same about the paint. The paint is equally randomly applied in patches, and it doesn't look good. It's a bit sloppy as well, not really applied accurately to the individual fibers, so it looks like quite a half-baked painting scheme. The center pack is made from a more solid looking wood, once again with more wooden fibers, but that sculpting detail is also quite lost because of a lack of a darker wash on the rest of the wings and the pack. We look at the insides of the wings, and it's the same thing. Decent sculpting work, but that's also let down by a lack of a darker wash and the really randomly applied patches of green paint. There's a peg over here, and that goes into the back of the figure. The fit is quite okay, and he holds up his wings just fine. I think the wings are decently sized, and this actually gives Groot quite a nice shelf presence. Next up we have a really adorable mini rocket figure. However, this is just a lump of plastic. There's no articulation, not even in his head, so that's a bit disappointing. Rocket is sculpted sitting down, and you can see the bushy texture of his fur. Black paint for his wide eyes, and also white for his different fur color around his ears, nose, as well as down the stripes of his tail. So this is a really cute and a nice accessory, but I would have liked his head to at least be able to turn and tilt. And just like in the promotional material and pictures, you can see Groot can hold Rocket Raccoon quite nicely in his open hands. And finally, Groot also comes with two fists. These are sculpted in the same brown, milk chocolate looking plastic, with also the grainy and viney texture. The left fist isn't painted, but the right one is. And normally I would say that having paint on a hand is quite a nice little bit of extra detail, with the green over here just behind his thumb and on the inside of his fist. However, it does also suffer from that same randomness in the application of the green paint. So once again, I do think the paint could have been applied more purposefully. These fists are articulated inwards as well as outwards. And of course, naturally, these fists pop onto the figure just fine. And without open hands to hold onto Rocket, he can at least kind of sit on his shoulder. Now Groot is on a brand new sculpt, and we have a closer look at his head sculpt. It's in the same milk chocolate brown plastic. There's nice texturing for the wooden grains down his face, but you can also see clearly formed facial features like his eyes and his mouth, as well as his quite pronounced brow. There's digital dot matrix printing technique for the colors in his eyes and his lips, while there's also a subtle shading for the wooden grain and the contours around his eyes, his cheeks, and his mouth. So I do like the treatment of the paint on his face because it feels purposeful. There's a bit of green shading down the top of his head as well, and I think that adds a nice color variation to all that brown. However, once you move past his face, the rest of the head sculpt is a little lackluster in terms of paint, and you will see that's a common running theme on the rest of his body. There's no wash on the back of his head, or even on the top as well, even though that's really nice sculpting, once again to show the wooden grain, kind of like in the middle of a tree trunk, with the rings to show the age of the tree. And the lack of shading is really apparent because you've seen how nice it could look on the front of his face, but it's clearly missing on the rest of his head. So the great work on the front of his head sculpt really kind of emphasizes how lacking it is on the rest of his head as well as his body, especially when the sculpting work is really nice. That sculpting work is also brought down to the rest of his torso and his arms. Since this Groot has a more chunky aesthetic, it's meant to show how he kind of armors up. So the difference in the sculpting, like around his neck and the top part of his collarbones, and even on the insides of his arms, look more fibrous, kind of looking a little bit like muscle tissue, while you have the more flat and harder looking plates around the front part of his chest and his abdomen, and on the outside of his arms, as well as his shoulder pad. That makes him look more rugged and ready to move into battle. Now we have a closer look at his torso in terms of paint, and you will see that there is a little bit of shading as well over here near the left side of his collarbone, and also in a couple of gaps down the front part of his chest and his abdomen down the middle. Now that's the kind of shading that's needed actually for the whole entire body to really bring out all that great sculpting and texture work. Once again, there's also some green patches. This time it looks a little more purposeful because there's a little bit of sculpted shrubs over here at the top part of his chest as well as down the middle. But the randomness in terms of the paint applications is once again apparent once you go and look past all that sculpted shrubs. You see some patches down the left side of his abdomen, a bit on his arms, and there's this one really green shoot coming out of his left forearm that really doesn't match up to anything else on his sculpted body. It also looks greener than any of the greens on the rest of his body. So this is a strange feature. It might be true to the character design, but it just sticks out and looks really weird compared to the rest of his body. Now the one thing that I have to compliment Hasbro on is his shoulder pad. This shoulder pad is sculpted keyed into his shoulder, so it travels with his arm as you articulate it and doesn't get in the way as you rotate his arm around. Now let's go on to the back of the figure. He's still got those kind of armor plating that's sculpted on his upper side of his back and also on his butt, which is hilarious. But once again, as usual with Hasbro, there is no paint on the back, except for a little bit of random green once again over here. So the back of the figure looks really bland and kind of reminds me of a messy Snickers or Mars bar. Now I see that there's also a shoot here on the right side of his calf, but that's not painted, just the way that this shoot is. So the paint is really haphazard on this figure, so all that great sculpting and engineering work is really lost because of the poor paint applications. Now let's have a look at the articulation. His head is on a ball hinge, so it does spin 360. The ball also affords you just a minor bit of tilting sideways. The hinge gives you decent range looking down as well as up. Swivel hinge on the shoulders with the shoulder pad keyed in, so you don't have to worry about it getting in the way as you rotate his arm all the way around, and also coming out very nicely. There's an upper bicep swivel for 360 spin, a swivel just above his single hinged elbow that gets you only about 90 degrees, but you can also spin his arms outward just slightly and inward. You don't really need to use that because you already have the bicep swivel. There's a swivel and a hinge at his wrist for 360 spin, as well as going in and out. Ball joint at the waist, so he spins 360. You also get some sideways tilting. There seems to be better range bending leftwards than rightwards, and he also gets quite a decent range bending forward as well as backward. But over here you can see a little bit of the gumminess on that joint and the plastics used on this figure, kind of exposing a little bit of that ball joint. He's got ball joints at the hips that do feel quite gummy, as you can see, but they do give him more than a decent spread, especially for a big bulky guy like Groot. There's also no problems going forward and backward, more than enough for Groot. There's an upper thigh swivel, so it goes 360. Just like his elbows, it's a swivel on top of a single hinged knee, only going about 90 degrees and letting you spin in and out just a little bit. Hinged at the ankle for upward tilt and downward tilt. And finally also ankle pivot, going outwards and inwards. So I'll say Groot's articulation is, I guess, okay. You're not able to actually move or pose his wings, but you should still be able to get some decent poses out of this guy. However, I'm not sure about the durability, especially in those gummy hip joints. So it remains to be seen if he can hold some dynamic and wide poses on your shelf for an extended duration. For size, Groot stands at about 7.5 inches to the top of his head, and that's about 19 centimeters, while Rocket sits at about just under an inch, and that's under 2.5 centimeters. So here's a quick comparison with the only other Groot figure that I have, which is the Deluxe Evolution Groot from the Toys R Us exclusive. And while this is far from the perfect representation of Groot, he does have a dark wash all over the entire figure, and that really brings out the sculpted wooden and viney textures. He suffers from the same faults like the random applications of green paint, but you can see that he's made from a more solid plastic, and he really feels rock solid and stable on the table. But this new Groot feels a little gummy and wobbly, because Hasbro might have degraded the material of the plastic that they're using for the newer figures. The lack of wash also makes him really look like a piece of milk chocolate. And of course we have to compare the smaller guys as well, and this is really quite adorable to have the little version of Groot and Rocket Raccoon now. Even though he's shorter than the previous Groot figure, he naturally still towers over some other cosmic heroes. He's just about the same height as Space Venom and Thanos. And here he is with Captain America and Iron Man. For comparisons with other lines, here he is with some G.I. Joe Classified series and some Star Wars Black series. The sculpting and engineering on this figure is decent, but it's terribly let down by a poor paint scheme, lack of articulation in the wings, and the gummy consistency in the plastic material. At this elevated deluxe price point, it's hard to recommend this one, especially when it looks like a chunk of moldy chocolate. I feel like this one will go to clearance, so you could wait for price drops before you pick this one up. Please like and share this video, let me know what you think in the comments below, subscribe to my channel, or even hit the super thanks button. Thanks for watching, take care, and stay safe.